What if the biggest lies you have ever been told came from the one voice you trust most, your own mind? Think about the last time you made a mistake. A real one. Maybe you hurt someone you love, took a bad decision at work, or held onto a belief long after the evidence told you to let go. Now ask yourself honestly, in the aftermath, what did you feel first? Was it genuine accountability? Or was it something else? A quiet internal lawyer, suddenly appearing, building a case for why it actually was not your fault? Here is a disturbing truth that researchers have studied for decades. Most people, intelligent, well-meaning, good-hearted people, almost never truly accept responsibility for their worst mistakes. Not because they are evil, not because they are weak, but because the human brain has a sophisticated, automatic, and largely invisible system designed to protect the ego at all costs. And here is where it gets dangerous. The smarter you are, the better this system works. The more educated you are, the more elegant your excuses become. The more experienced you are, the more convincing your self-deception sounds, even to yourself. This is not a story about bad people. This is a story about all of us. About the invisible psychological machinery that turns ordinary humans into masters of self-justification. About why people in conflict never see themselves as the villain. About why politicians double down when caught lying. About why abusers believe they are the real victims. About why you, yes you, are probably not as self-aware as you believe. And most importantly, what you can do to break free from the trap your own mind has built around you. The authors who changed how we see ourselves. The book we are exploring today is called Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me. It was written by two of the most respected minds in the history of psychology. Carol Tavris is a social psychologist and writer who has spent decades studying how and why people think the way they do. She is the author of multiple critically acclaimed books, a fellow of the American Psychological Association, and one of the most clear-eyed voices in science writing today. She has a rare ability to translate dense academic research into ideas that feel like they were written specifically for you, because they were. Her co-author, Elliot Aronson, is one of the giants of social psychology. He is the only person in the history of the American Psychological Association to win all three of its major awards, for research, teaching, and writing. He was a student of the legendary Leon Festinger, the man who first developed the theory of cognitive dissonance in the 1950s. Aronson later expanded that theory into one of the most powerful frameworks for understanding human behavior ever created. Together, Tavris and Aronson did not just write a book. They wrote a mirror that most people will find deeply uncomfortable to look into, but absolutely cannot afford to look away from. To understand everything in this book, you first need to understand one concept: cognitive dissonance. Imagine your mind as a room full of furniture. Every piece of furniture is a belief, a value, a self-image. I am a good person. I make smart decisions. I am honest. I care about others. Now imagine someone walks into that room and drops a piece of furniture that does not belong. A memory of something you did that contradicts all of those beliefs. Something selfish. Something dishonest. Something you are ashamed of. The room suddenly feels chaotic. The furniture does not fit together anymore. There is a loud, uncomfortable, almost painful psychological noise that fills that space. That noise has a name: cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort, sometimes almost physical, that humans experience when they hold two conflicting thoughts, beliefs, or behaviors at the same time. I believe I am a good person crashes into, I just did something bad. I believe I am smart crashes into, I just made a terrible decision. The brain cannot tolerate this collision for long. So what does it do? It resolves it. Automatically. Instantly. And almost always without your conscious awareness. The brain does not ask for your permission. It does not hold a meeting. It simply begins the work of making that noise stop, and it will do almost anything to succeed. And the most reliable way to make that noise stop? Self-justification. Tavris and Aronson introduce one of the most powerful images in the entire book, what they call the pyramid of choice. Picture two people standing at the very top of a steep pyramid. They are almost identical. Same values, same personality, same moral compass. Then they face a decision, a small one, barely noticeable. One person makes choice A. The other makes choice B. These choices are separated by only a tiny distance, barely a step apart. But here is what happens next. To justify choice A, the first person starts to see choice B as slightly worse than it actually is. And to justify choice B, the second person starts to see choice A as slightly worse. These small justifications feel natural, almost automatic, but they push both people slightly further apart. Then comes the next decision and the next. Each time, both people justify their own position a little more aggressively. And each time, the gap between them grows. By the time they reach the bottom of that pyramid, they are standing miles apart, and neither one can even remember how close they once were. One has become convinced they made all the right choices, the other has too. And both believe the other person is the irrational, dishonest, wrong-headed one. This is how ordinary people become extremists. This is how good doctors become dismissive. This is how honest politicians become corrupt. This is how loving couples become bitter strangers. Not through one dramatic fall, but through thousands of tiny, barely visible self-justifications that each felt completely reasonable in the moment. The authors describe this phenomenon with devastating clarity. Self-justification is more powerful and more dangerous than the explicit lie. Because when you lie, some part of you knows the truth. But when you self-justify, you have already convinced yourself the lie is the truth. Now here is where the story gets even more unsettling. Because self-justification does not only affect how we make decisions going forward. It reaches backward, into the past, and rewrites your memories to fit the story your ego needs to tell. Memory feels like a recording. We believe it works like a video camera, capturing events as they happened, storing them faithfully, and playing them back accurately when we need them. This belief is one of the most dangerous illusions the human mind creates. Memory is not a recording, memory is a story you tell yourself, and every time you tell it, you edit it slightly, unconsciously, automatically, according to who you believe you are today. Researchers Elizabeth Loftus and her colleagues spent decades proving this in laboratory after laboratory. They showed that human beings can be made to remember events that never happened, with complete confidence, vivid detail, and absolute certainty. A word change in a question could alter what a person claimed to have seen. A single suggestion could plant an entirely false memory that a person would defend as true years later. But you do not need laboratory manipulation for this to happen. It happens naturally, every day, in service of your ego. You remember the argument with your partner, but you remember your own words as more reasonable than they were. You remember the business decision, but you remember your hesitation, your doubts, your warnings that conveniently prove you knew something was wrong all along. You remember the relationship, but you remember yourself as kinder, more patient, more loving than the evidence supports. The authors describe a chilling real-world consequence of this: eyewitness testimony. For most of modern legal history, an eyewitness saying, "I saw that person commit the crime," was considered nearly irrefutable evidence. It felt honest, it felt certain. The witness believed it completely. But DNA evidence has now exonerated hundreds of people who were convicted based on confident, sincere eyewitness testimony that was simply wrong. People spent decades in prison. Some came within hours of execution, because a human brain, under stress and shaped by its own biases, constructed a memory that felt absolutely real but was not. Think about that for a moment. If memory can be this unreliable in something as high stakes as witnessing a crime, what does that mean for the memories you use to justify your decisions, your relationships, your beliefs about yourself? Here is a question. Have you ever spent hours researching a topic, only to find yourself increasingly certain that what you already believed was exactly right? If your answer is yes, congratulations. You have experienced one of the most fundamental features of the human brain: confirmation bias. The tendency to seek, notice, remember, and believe information that confirms what you already think, and to discount, ignore, forget, and dismiss information that challenges it. Tavris and Aronson show how confirmation bias works in tandem with cognitive dissonance to create a nearly impenetrable belief fortress. Once you have committed to a position, your brain begins to function less like a scientist searching for truth and more like a lawyer searching for evidence to win the case that is already decided. They describe studies where people were shown identical evidence about capital punishment. People who already supported capital punishment read the evidence and came away more convinced it was justified. People who already opposed it read the same evidence and came away more convinced it was unjust. The same facts. Two opposite conclusions. Because the brain was not processing the evidence, it was filtering it through the lens of the conclusion it had already reached. This is why arguing with someone rarely changes their mind. This is why presenting facts to a conspiracy theorist often makes them believe more strongly, not less. This is why political polarization accelerates even as access to information increases. We are not getting smarter with more data. We are getting better at defending whatever we already believe. Imagine you have spent 3 years working on a project. You have sacrificed time, money, relationships, and sleep. You have convinced your team, your family, your investors that this is the right path. And now, with overwhelming clarity, the evidence tells you the project will fail. What do? If you are honest with yourself, you probably already know the answer, and it is not walk away. Most people in this situation do not make a rational calculation. They double down. They invest more. They work harder. They explain away the warning signs. They search for the one data point that might justify continuing. Because to stop now would mean admitting that all those years, all that sacrifice, all those confident proclamations were wrong. Economists call this the sunk cost fallacy. Psychologists call it escalation of commitment. The authors call it one of the most financially, professionally, and personally destructive forces in human decision-making. They describe this happening at every level of human organization. Governments continue wars that are clearly lost, not because victory is possible, but because the cost already paid is too psychologically painful to accept as wasted. Couples stay in toxic relationships for years, not because the relationship is good, but because admitting it was a mistake means admitting they made a terrible choice. Investors hold onto failing stocks, not because the stock will recover, but because selling it would make the loss permanent and real. The particularly tragic part? The more you have invested, the more desperate the self-justification becomes. And the more you self-justify, the harder it becomes to see the situation clearly. You become not just wrong, but confidently, elaborately, stubbornly wrong in ways that damage everything around you. But this is where things become truly disturbing. Because cognitive dissonance and self-justification do not just explain why people stay in bad jobs or argue too long about football. They explain atrocities. Tavris and Aronson examine how ordinary, decent human beings, people who genuinely believed they were good, came to participate in, enable, or justify some of history's most horrifying acts. Not because they were monsters, but because once they took the first step in a wrong direction, the pyramid of self-justification carried them further and further down until behaviors that would once have seemed unthinkable felt not only acceptable but necessary. They examine the case of police officers who are genuinely certain that a person they arrested is guilty, even after DNA evidence proves otherwise. The psychological mechanism is not corruption. It is not malice. It is the same cognitive dissonance engine running in all of us. I am a good officer. I arrested an innocent person. The brain cannot hold both of those. So it resolves the conflict by rewriting the certainty of guilt until it feels absolute. They explore how therapists, well-intentioned, educated, caring professionals, can guide patients toward false memories of abuse that never happened, and then defend those memories with total confidence. How the very people meant to heal can cause deep wounds, all while being certain they are doing good. And they examine how systems, governments, institutions, corporations use the same psychological mechanisms to engage in what the authors call moral disengagement, the process by which people reorganize their understanding of ethics to exclude the harmful actions they take from the category of harm. The soldier who convinces himself the civilians are not innocent. The executive who tells himself the pollution is not his fault. The politician who knows he is lying but has redefined truth to mean something he can still claim to believe. What makes this so deeply challenging to confront is that none of these people are making a conscious choice to be evil. They are using the same mental machinery you use. The same machinery running right now as you listen to this. Relationships are, perhaps, the most personal theater in which self-justification plays out. And they are the most painful. Think of any significant conflict you have had with someone you love. A partner, a parent, a close friend, a sibling. Now think about how you remember it. Are you the patient one, the reasonable one, the one who tried while the other person was impossible? Almost certainly yes. And here is the most uncomfortable truth of this entire conversation. They remember it exactly the same way, with themselves as the patient, reasonable one. The authors describe how self-justification in relationships works through a process of grievance accumulation. You do something that slightly hurts your partner. You immediately self-justify. It was not that bad, they are overreacting, they have done worse. Your partner, now hurt and also self-justifying, responds in a way that feels disproportionate to you. You feel wronged. You escalate. They escalate. Each of you, at every step, genuinely believes you are the more reasonable party. Tavris and Aronson point to research showing that in most relationship conflicts, both people are usually doing some version of the same thing, diminishing their own contribution to the problem and amplifying the other person's. This is not dishonesty. It is automatic. It is cognitive dissonance resolution in real time. And the longer a relationship continues, the more entrenched these patterns become. The pyramid extends. The stories each person tells themselves become more polished, more elaborate, more certain. And what began as two people who were almost identical in their positions on that pyramid become two people who cannot even remember a time when they saw the same situation the same way. Nowhere is the machinery of self-justification more visible or more consequential than in the world of politics and power. The authors explore how political leaders, once they have publicly committed to a position, face an almost unbearable cognitive dissonance when evidence proves them wrong. The public commitment becomes a psychological trap. To admit the mistake would be to simultaneously admit that they lied, that they were wrong, that they cost lives, money, or trust, and that all the self-justifications since were built on a false foundation. So they do not admit it. Instead, they double down. They find new evidence to support the old position. They reframe the question. They attack the credibility of those who challenge them. They claim the mistake was actually a success viewed from the right angle. And with each cycle, the cognitive machinery reinforces itself, until the leader has genuinely lost the ability to distinguish between what they chose to believe and what is actually true. The authors are careful to show this is not a partisan phenomenon. It appears across the political spectrum, in every country, in every era. It is not an ideology problem. It is a human brain problem. And understanding it is essential for any citizen trying to evaluate the leaders they are asked to trust. So where does this leave us? If the system is so powerful, so automatic, so invisible, is there any escape? But it requires something most people find genuinely difficult: the deliberate, practiced, and uncomfortable willingness to be wrong. Tavris and Aronson do not offer easy solutions, because there are none. But they identify several practices that research suggests can genuinely help interrupt the cycle of self-justification. The first is self-compassion, not as an excuse, but as a precondition. One of the counterintuitive findings in psychological research is that people who are hardest on themselves after mistakes are not the most likely to change their behavior. They are among the least, because the shame and self-attack of harsh self-criticism triggers the very cognitive dissonance protection mechanisms we have been discussing. The brain says, "This person is good. Therefore, this mistake cannot be that bad. And the justification begins. People who can say, honestly and without drama, I made a mistake, I understand why, and I want to do better, are far more capable of genuine change. Not because they are softer on themselves, but because they are not triggering the ego protection system. They are working with their psychology instead of against it. The second is actively seeking disconfirmation. Instead of searching for evidence that you are right, deliberately search for evidence that you might be wrong. Ask the question that most people never ask. What would have to be true for my position to be incorrect? And then actually look. The third is recognizing the warning signs of self-justification in real time. When you notice yourself constructing an elaborate justification for why you do not need to apologize, why the other person was really at fault, why the investment should continue, why you had no other choice, pause. The sophistication of the justification is often directly proportional to how wrong you actually are. The fourth, and perhaps the most powerful, is cultivating what the authors call a scientist's mindset. Not the certainty of someone defending a conclusion, but the curiosity of someone genuinely trying to discover the truth. Scientists, the best ones, do not just publish their findings. They design their experiments to try to disprove their own hypotheses. They actively invite challenge. They update their beliefs when the evidence demands it. They see being wrong as information, not as defeat. Imagine applying that same mindset to your own life, to your own mistakes, to your own beliefs, to your own memories. Not, how do I prove I was right? But what actually happened, and what can I honestly learn from it? Here is the final thing that Tavris and Aronson want you to take away from this work. This book is not a condemnation of human nature. It is not an argument that people are fundamentally dishonest or irredeemably flawed. It is something far more generous than that. It is a compassionate, rigorous, deeply honest account of how the human mind works, and a quiet invitation to do something rare and extraordinary. To see yourself clearly, not through the flattering lens of self-justification, not through the distorting mirror of confirmation bias, not through the edited reel of reconstructed memory, but clearly, with all the complexity and contradiction and imperfection that real human beings actually contain. Because the moment you can see the machinery, the moment you can catch yourself mid-justification and ask honestly whether you are protecting your ego or pursuing the truth, you gain something almost no one else has, the ability to actually learn from your mistakes instead of just defending them. Mistakes were made. That much is certain. The only question that has ever mattered, is whether they were made by someone who can acknowledge them. The answer to that question will define not just who you have been, but who you are capable of becoming. This has been Mistakes Were Made, but not by me, by Carol Tavris and Elliot Aronson. If this video helped you see something more clearly today, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more content like this, content that challenges the way you think about your own mind, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next video might just be the one that changes everything.